Welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Russia and Ukraine hold first direct peace talks in 3 years today, but Putin stays away, sending top aides instead. Trump also won't attend as Moscow dispatches senior officials to Istanbul for high-stakes negotiations. India briefs the UN Security Council on the resistance front's role in the Pahalgam terror attack, seeking its official designation as a terror outfit. Top UN counter-terror officials meet Indian delegation as New Delhi pushes for global action against the group. US President Donald Trump visits Qatar as Doha signs defense pacts and a major Qatar Airways deal to buy hundreds of Boeing planes. He'll tour a US military base today before wrapping up his regional trip in Abu Dhabi. At least 80 Palestinians were killed on Wednesday in a wave of Israeli airstrikes on northern Gaza, according to local health officials. The deadliest strikes hit homes in the Jabalia area, marking a sharp escalation as US President Donald Trump continues his Middle East tour. A Russian missile hit an industrial site near Sumy on Ukraine's northern border, killing 3, says regional governor. The attack comes as Ukrainian and Russian officials meet for their first direct peace talks in over 3 years. The United States imposes new sanctions on 6 individuals and 12 entities tied to Iran's efforts to build ballistic missiles with locally sourced materials. The Treasury Department says the measures target those helping Tehran develop critical components for its missile industry. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese meets Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto to discuss defence cooperation and global trade. This marks Albanese's first international trip since re-election, underlining Canberra's focus on strengthening ties in the Indo-Pacific. Cassandra Ventura testifies that former partner Sean Diddy Coombs raped her and subjected her to years of physical abuse. Her testimony reveals a disturbing pattern of violence as legal proceedings against the music mogul continue. Our top story today, US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin will not attend today's peace talks between Moscow and Kyiv, talks that were proposed by Putin himself and marking what could be the first direct negotiations in 3 years. The Kremlin had announced that instead of Putin, Russia would send a delegation of experienced negotiators, including presidential advisor Vladimir Medensky, Deputy Defense Minister Alexander Fomin, G.R.U. Chief Igor Kostyukov, and Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Galuzin. Putin had earlier called for talks in Istanbul without any preconditions, but never confirmed his own attendance. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who had said he would only join if Vladimir Putin was there, is now headed to Turkey. Trump, who had been considering attending, will also not be present, according to a US official speaking after Russia's delegation was announced. Trump has been pushing for a 30-day ceasefire between the warring sides. Meanwhile, a Russian missile strike on an industrial site near Sumy in northeastern Ukraine killed 3 people, according to the regional governor. The region, which borders Russia's Kursk region, has seen repeated attacks, including a Palm Sunday strike last month, which left 35 dead. Additionally, the delegation representing the US in Turkey includes Secretary of State Marco Rubio and envoys Steve Witkoff and Keith Kellogg. The last direct talks between Russia and Ukraine took place in Istanbul in March of 2022, a month after the war started. We're now joined by our guest today, Dr. Wael Awad, who is a foreign affairs expert. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Awad. These are the first peace talks between the two warring sides in over 3 years. Zelensky said he will not attend unless Vladimir Putin attends himself. What does Putin's no-show say about Russia's real intentions in these negotiations, Dr. Awad?
Thank you for having me. I believe that the conflict have reached a dead end because neither Russia is able to gain any more territories for the last 3 months, nor the Ukrainian are able to defeat them. So therefore, both sides are looking for a way out to end this conflict. And I think President Trump coming to power in the United States is playing the major role in bringing these two factions into to talk to each other. But even with the absence of Zelensky and Putin from this, and President Trump from visiting Turkey, I believe that talk will continue, and there has to be some sort of an agreement, at least for a ceasefire for a month. So Russia may be thinking that this can help it in regrouping. Similarly, the Ukrainian thing on that line. But I believe whatever will be whoever comes to the meeting today to Turkey, there will be some sort of an agreement, and let's see how Ankara can push this forward, and even with the pressure from the United States.
Hopes of a direct Putin and Zelensky meeting have been foiled today. But by going without Putin, does that strengthen or weaken Zelensky's hand?
Well, I believe that Putin, he's having the key to ending this war. Therefore, everybody was banking on his coming to Ankara to meet face-to-face with Zelensky. But let's also take in consideration that Zelensky was never been a good friend to Putin, and Putin never gave him that respect he was looking for. So therefore, there is no way that after all these years of this conflict between the two sides, that they can meet face-to-face unless the basic ground has been achieved for a ceasefire, or could be a complete kind of an agreement between the two sides. We may see a meeting between the two leaders, but at the moment I don't see any meeting between both of them, because Zelensky is supported by the West, but America is putting pressure on them. I believe there is some sort of a game plan in this, what's going on between the two countries, because vested interested nation, though the United States is one of the countries that wanted to end this war, as Trump says, there is a way that delaying of signing an agreement between the two sides will push the United States again back to support Zelensky, arming him, and that's what will send the message to the Europeans, especially Germany and Poland, to step in forward to take the lead in a confrontation with Russia.
Dr. Awad, there was high hopes for today. Obviously, it's resulted in a no Putin show, and also continued attacks on the ground with Russia striking Ukraine's Sumy region. Is there any chance of a real diplomatic breakthrough today, do you think?
Well, I think they both, as I said, both sides are looking for a way out, because they're totally exhausted. You know, Russia is at the other end is already suffering a lot. They have suffering in terms of the sanctions that they have been implemented on them. The army, they are losing also the ammunitions and the arsenals that they have been pushing hard into the forefront. So therefore, there is lots of pressure on the Russian army for sure. Similarly, Zelensky is also facing lots of problems internally and also externally of getting the support. I think there has to be an end of this conflict for two reasons. A, Russia, if it goes desperate, it may go for using some other non-traditional or conventional method to achieve its objective. So even the United States knows that the Russians are much stronger than the Ukrainian, but with the support of the West, maybe still Zelensky is hanging on. But having said that, I think there is a tremendous pressure in the international community to end this war. I think the United States as well, having also a plan that wanted to appease Russia, especially with Trump in power, for two reasons. A, that they wanted to make sure that Russia is separated from China, so that the United States can take on China in the near future in the Asia Pacific. So if that can happen, I think that is what the Americans are hoping for. But that will not go so smoothly without reaching all the conditions of Russia or President Putin on the table, especially with those provinces that the majority Russian.
Dr. Wael Awad, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. We now move over to South Asia, where India is stepping up diplomatic pressure at the United Nations to designate the Resistance Front, or the TRF, as a terrorist organisation. The move comes days after the TRF claimed responsibility for the deadly April the 22nd terror attack in Pahalgam, Jammu and Kashmir. An Indian technical team is currently in New York meeting with key UN counter-terror bodies, including the 1267 Sanctions Committee, the UN Office of Counter-Terrorism and the Counter-Terrorism Committee Executive Directorate. Meanwhile, the United Nations Under-Secretary General Vladimir Koronkov and Assistant Secretary General Natalia Gurman expressed condolences for the terror attack. India has presented detailed evidence linking the TRF to Lashkar-e-Taiba, a Pakistan-based UN-prescribed terror group. Officials say the TRF initially claimed the Pahalgam attack, then withdrew that claim under pressure, likely from handlers in Pakistan. Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri has criticised Pakistan's successful effort to remove the TRF's name from the UN Security Council's April 25th statement on the attack, calling it an alarming signal of state complicity. This marks the first formal Indian push at the UN against the TRF since Operation Sindoor. We're now joined by Jayant Krishna, who is a senior fellow at the CSIS, to discuss this in more detail. Jayant, thank you very much for joining us. How critical is this to recognise the TRF as a terrorist organisation, both at the UN and also obviously on the world stage? How important would it be for the UN to recognise this group as a terrorist organisation?
So I think it is quite important for the Resistance Front, which is acronymed as the TRF, which is some kind of an outfit of Lashkar-e-Taiba, to be declared as a terrorist outfit. So let's understand the meeting that happened between Indian diplomats and the 1267 Sanctions Committee of the UN Security Council. So what did this committee do? It essentially manages the list of sanctions against the countries where UN sanctions go. And also it monitors the implementation of the sanctions, that how effective has been the implementation, So that is what the task of this committee is. And therefore, it is very, very important that, the right messaging happens and they are listed as a terrorist outfit. Within the purview of this sanction committee, they can freeze the financial assets of the terrorist outfits. They can also prevent, the entry of or transit of these outfits through a member country, of the UN. It also can act effectively in preventing supply of arms, to this terrorist outfits which are listed there. So I think it's very, very important. And as you said, not just the UN 1267 Sanctions Committee, but all over the world, people are fed up of terrorism. Terrorism has not benefited any country anywhere, right? There are a few countries which are black sheep, which support terrorist outfits, or do not do enough to stop their, activities. But the fact is, nobody, be it China, be it the US, be it the European Union, no country or group of countries, would like to support anything that goes with terrorism, and therefore India's diplomatic efforts with lots of major countries in the world, are happening. So that people realize what Pakistan has done by way of killing of 26 tourists, in Pahalgam, and then the Operation Sindoor, which was launched, which was largely actually only the first step of Operation Sindoor, which Indian government launched against Pakistan, was not against civilians, not against army or air force. It was only targeted at the, at the terror outfits and their physical infrastructure and so on and so forth. So I think it's very, very important to my mind.
Yes, and Jayant, this obviously marks the first formal Indian push at the UN, but how have you and how do you analyse the international response to the terror attack, all the events leading from the 22nd when that terror attack happened in Jammu and Kashmir, all the way up to the ceasefire. Looking back at Operation Sindoor, how do you analyse that? How the international community viewed the entire situation?
So international community generally, remains guarded. But if you dissect any country, China, for example, right? The intensity, and China and Pakistan are supposed to be very good friends. China has already funded an economic corridor in Pakistan. It is funding lots of infrastructure and energy sector projects in Pakistan, and even supplies arms to Pakistan, right? But China has been very, very measured, in their reaction. They have not come out as strongly against India as was expected, because the fact is, if China does business with the country, it does not like the presence of terrorism and the terror outfits. So I think if you look at the US, the Secretary of State has said very clearly when he spoke to his counterparts, to the External Affairs Minister Jaishankar in India, or the Pakistan Prime Minister, while talking to the Pakistan Prime Minister, he said, among other things, this was just before the ceasefire happened, that you must stop and prevent it becoming a full-fledged war, and Pakistan must stop supporting terror outfits. So I think India's efforts have been yielding good results, diplomatic results, attributable to two things. One is, the soft power of our diplomacy. And secondly, no country in the world likes terrorism, and every country has been adversely affected by terrorism. So I think these efforts are, having good results. UK has also issued a statement which is tending towards India, although they are largely neutral. So I think it's bearing results, more than one would have expected.
Yes, and do you think China or other members of the P5 members, that being the United Kingdom, France, the United States, China, and Russia, could veto the designation? And how would India respond, say that would happen?
See, in this situation, things are very different. See, let me tell you, first of all, the UN Security Council's 1267 Sanctions Committee itself, it is not the first time when India has protested and said that the TRF should be declared a terrorist outfit. If you go back a couple of years, in 2023-24, India has been providing evidence to this committee that the Pakistan has been supporting not only Lashkar-e-Taiba, but Jaish-e-Mohammed, and so on and so forth. It has gone to them with solid evidence. So I think I do not see as big a problem this time of such a resolution, if it comes up, being vetoed by any of these countries that you mentioned, because of two reasons. While India has done an excellent job of interfacing with politicians, with diplomats in these countries, and sharing the reason. And secondly, no country wants terrorism to thrive at all. No country worth its salt, worth its name, wants to do that. So I would somehow feel that sanity will prevail, and these countries would perhaps not use their veto power, if such a thing comes for voting.
Jayant Krishna, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure hearing from you. We now move to the Middle East, where in a major diplomatic development, Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara welcomed US President Donald Trump's decision to lift sanctions on Syria, calling it a historic and courageous move that will ease suffering and support the country's recovery. Shara praised the decision as a foundation for regional stability and thanked Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Turkish President Erdogan for facilitating his landmark meeting with Trump in Riyadh. Let's take a listen in to what the Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara has said.
وقد استجاب الرئيس ترامب مشكورا لهذا الحب، فكان قرار رفع العقوبات قرارا تاريخيا شجاعا أزال به معاناة الشعب وساعد على نهضته وأرسى أسس الاستقرار في المنطقة.
Meanwhile, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said he will meet with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Syrian Foreign Minister Assad al-Shibani following a NATO gathering to finalize the deal's implementation. He acknowledged the need for US congressional support, but emphasized Trump's strong commitment to lifting the sanctions swiftly to enable economic recovery and humanitarian access. We move on once again. US President Donald Trump has wrapped up his landmark state visit to Qatar with a flurry of deals and strong diplomatic signals. During his stay, Trump and Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani signed several defense agreements and a massive aviation deal. Qatar Airways is set to purchase over 200 Boeing jets worth $96 billion, including 787 and 777X models with GE engines. At a state dinner in Lusail Palace, Trump praised Qatar's growth, calling it the country magnificent and full of unbelievable potential. He thanked his hosts for their role in helping release the last living American hostage in Gaza. The evening ended on a lighter note as Trump and the Emir signed a football, marking Qatar's role as the host of the 2022 World Cup. Trump also visited a US military base in Qatar before heading to Abu Dhabi, which is his final stop on his 4-day tour of the Gulf region. We stay in the Middle East. A controversial US-backed humanitarian operation is set to begin in Gaza by the end of May, under a plan heavily criticized by the United Nations and other aid groups. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, supported by US firms UG Solutions and Safe Reach Solutions, will manage aid distribution through secure distribution sites in the south of Gaza. But with no aid deliveries since March the 2nd, humanitarian organizations warn that time is running out. Over 500,000 Gazans are at risk of starvation, according to some reports. And the UN and the ICRC say the proposed plan risks politicizing humanitarian relief as it bypasses traditional neutral channels. Gaza's health ministry has urged Israel to allow UN deliveries now until the new mechanism is operational, stressing the need to alleviate the ongoing humanitarian pressure. Israel has agreed to expand the number of distribution sites, but has not resumed aid deliveries, demanding Hamas release all the remaining hostages first. Now, in a related development, Israeli airstrikes intensified yesterday, killing at least 80 Palestinians, including women and children in Jabalia, according to some reports. Thousands more have been forced to evacuate as Israel expands its military operations. Later, the Israeli military issued new evacuation orders to people in several districts in Gaza City, forcing thousands of Palestinians to leave their shelters. The areas threatened by the evacuation warnings included several schools, the largest Shifa hospital, according to a map published by the Israeli army. Witnesses and medics said shortly after the evacuation orders, Israeli planes carried out several airstrikes against targets within Gaza City. The renewed violence comes as US President Donald Trump tours the region. He praised Hamas's release of American hostage Eden Alexander and also hinted at progress in securing more releases, though ceasefire efforts remain deadlocked. On the other hand, Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani said that Israel's attacks in Gaza this week send the signal that they are not interested in negotiating a ceasefire. He later added that the US-backed aid plan is unnecessary, stressing that UN should be allowed to provide aid. Moving on now, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian strongly rejected US President Donald Trump's criticism during his Gulf tour, declaring on state television that Iran will not bow to any bully. Pezeshkian said martyrdom is far sweeter than dying in bed, responding to Trump's remarks at the GCC summit in Riyadh, where Trump accused Iran of sponsoring terrorism and pursuing nuclear weapons. Trump reaffirmed his desire for a peaceful resolution, but warned that if Iran rejected his olive branch, the US would impose massive maximum pressure. He insisted Iran would not be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons, despite 4 rounds of indirect talks mediated by Oman. Tensions remain high. The Trump administration has continued to impose new sanctions on Iran. Yesterday, the US Treasury sanctioned 6 individuals and 12 entities linked to Iran's ballistic missile program for aiding in the domestic production of critical components. Listen in to the US president.
You're also working with us very closely with respect to negotiating a deal with Iran, which is the far friendlier course that you would see. I mean, we have 2 courses. There's only 2 courses. There aren't 3 or 4 or 5. There's 2. There's a friendly and a non-friendly, and the non-friendly is a violent course, and I don't want that.
We move over to North America now, where at least 21 people have been killed in a devastating traffic accident on a highway linking Mexico's Oaxaca and Puebla states. According to Puebla's Interior Minister, Samuel Aguilar, the crash involved 3 vehicles, including a cement truck, a bus and a transport van. Local reports say the truck attempted to overtake another vehicle, crossed into the opposite lane and collided head-on with the other 2 vehicles before plunging into a ravine and bursting into flames. Several others were injured and are currently receiving medical treatment. Investigations into this accident are underway. Now moving to the Indo-Pacific, where Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese arrived in Jakarta today for his first international visit since re-election, meeting Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto to discuss defence and global trade. Albanese said the visit highlights Canberra's commitment to strengthening ties with Indonesia, one of the world's largest democracies. Albanese emphasised boosting defence cooperation and investment, noting Australia's hosting of defence and maritime security training for Indonesian forces under last year's defence treaty. He also dismissed reports that Russia sought to base military aircraft in Indonesia's Papua province near Australia, stating Jakarta had rejected the request. The visit comes amid growing geopolitical tension, with Australia aiming to deepen ties in the region to counter Russian and Chinese influence. However, differences persist. Indonesia sees China and Russia as economic opportunities, contrasting with Canberra's more security-focused stance. Albanese also aims to expand trade with Southeast Asia to reduce reliance on China, though Indonesia remains a complex, protected market and competitor in commodity efforts. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.